Hello friends, my name is Ness, and today I'm going to be wrapping up the 10 books that I read last month. I had 3 main reading goals for this year. One is my classic 52, 72, 100 reading goal. So 52 is like the base level, the absolute least I want to be reading in any given year. 72 is like my mid goal, it's what I usually average. And 100 books has been like my stretch goal. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've always been beating 100 books, and last year I read like 244, but I don't feel it necessary to like kind of bring any of those numbers up. And I don't know how much of an anomaly in last year's reading will be. So I feel comfortable with this 52, 72, 100. It's still what I'm aiming for. The point is that in order to achieve my mid-level goal of 72 books a year, I have to be reading 6 books a month, and so I met that one. My second goal is to read 2 nonfiction books a month, and I absolutely met that one this month. I started the year off with These Precious Days by Patchett, and this was my first 5-star read of the year, my first read of the year. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you more about this because it is a Harper Collins title, and we are still holding the line. And on top of all of that, sort of separate from that, there was a recent op-ed in the New York Times about American Dirt and like kind of reflecting on the drama that happened with American Dirt 3 years ago. It was a terrible piece. It made me so angry on multiple levels, but also there was a quote from Patchett in there that just made me so annoyed with this author. Like, I'm really upset that this is my first read and my first 5-star of the year, but so it goes. We won't talk about it in this video. We'll see if we ever talk about it in the future. The second nonfiction book I read was How Far the Light Reaches by Sabrina Imbler. This is a book that is part science and part memoir. In it, Imbler pairs portraits of some deep sea creatures, some odd deep sea creatures, with moments of their life and sort of commentary on the things that they have personally experienced. There is really neat information here from a science perspective, but it is also very achingly tender from a memoir perspective. I will list the content warnings in the description, and I would take these very much to heart because there were moments in here that absolutely just had my heart in my throat. This is one of those nonfiction books that is very hard to rate because so much of it is just the author's personal experience, but from like the technical perspective, there were moments that I got a little bit lost in the science portion of it, that the science portion of it went on a bit too long for me. And in addition to that, there were like essays in here that did a better job of sort of seamlessly connecting the creature to the memoir in a way that just felt really smart and really funny sometimes, or thoughtful or whatnot. And there were times where that connection was a little bit more forced and not as natural. So those were my 2 small complaints. I say that they are small in the larger face of this being really beautifully written. Even the things that were not like one-to-one relatable to me were things that were so human that I found myself being able to pick up pieces of Imbler's experience and just feel them deeply for myself. I loved the combination of science and memoir in here, and I would recommend this for people trying out nonfiction and science nonfiction because it does have that beautiful balance between the 2. Overall, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And my third nonfiction book is How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. And this is exactly how it is described. We go to different locations, and Smith shares some of the history of that location, whether it is a plantation or a cemetery or a jail or even Central Park, and then talks a little bit about the way that the history of that place has been passed. I thought that this was phenomenal. Clint Smith is a poet, and you can absolutely tell in the language how beautiful it was, how lush it was. There is absolutely a narrative influence in here as well. We are learning history, but he is sharing it through stories, through people that he interviews, but also his own observations. He is physically at these places and really painting a beautiful picture for us through these stories and his experience. I love this so much. I think it is such an incredible work. It is the first day of Black History Month, so I highly recommend, especially because I think nonfiction written by Black authors is so incredibly important when you are talking about diversifying your reading or doing any sort of work towards anti-racism or reckoning with the history or experience of Black Americans in this country. This also now fits into a niche category that I have of books where the epilogue elevates the whole experience. Like, I don't want to say it's like the best part, but I definitely like cried during the epilogue, and it was so beautiful in the way that it tied everything together that like by the time I was done reading the epilogue, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that this was a 5 out of 5 stars. I guess from there, let's talk about 2 books that I reread in the month of January. The first is Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. I know that I just finished reading the series last year and I went back and reread book 1 in January, but I am reading it with friends and we are slowly making our way through the entire series for this year. Some people are rereading, some people are reading for the first time. We were talking so much about Ilona Andrews in this Discord that it just became like natural that we would reread, so I was like, yeah, let's do that. All of my feelings that I had on first read about this stand. This is like solidly a 3 or 3.5 star book. There are definitely things that haven't aged as well in the beginning. Some fatphobic language in specific was pointed out in the discourse as well, and there is something like just a little bit tropey or formulaic here in some of the elements, which honestly when I go into an urban fantasy I'm kind of craving anyway. It's like romance for me where I am craving a bit of tropiness, but that is something to be aware of if you're starting the series. The other thing is that we see the characters here at their very beginning. There isn't much character movement for them in a book 1 of a 10-book series, but immediately what sold me was that I was invested in Kate as main character. I love her so much. She's gunning, she's punning, she has her flaws, and you can very clearly not only see her flaws, but like the things that she is working against in terms of her own like situation in life, her loneliness, how isolated she is from everybody. So I immediately was like, yeah, that's my girl, which is what sold me on trying and continuing on in the series. You do meet the main love interest here, and he's such a dick. So that's hard also. Like, people in the Discord were like, are we supposed to like him? And I was like, not yet. But I love this. I do end up really loving the world and the lore. The city of Atlanta in this setting, the way that it is in terms of the magical influence and everything and the magical creatures that all populate it is such a feature of this series overall. And seeing it here at the beginning and even getting the pieces of exposition is fun for me on reread because I get to see like where it all started, but I understand why on a first read it's probably not as fun. It is super solid. I am not discouraging. I am encouraging people, in fact, to read the series if you haven't already, but I can recognize that it is a tougher sell because this is not the best book in the entire series, but it was so fun to read. They're so readable. They're very, very bingeable. Highly recommend, especially for anybody like reading slumpy, in the mood to binge a series. I wouldn't do too many at a time though. I think they do best with some breathing room in between some of the books, like maybe binge 2 or 3 at a time and take a break kind of thing. But anyways, yes, highly recommend as always. Kate Daniels stand forever on this channel. And then I also reread The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness, specifically because somebody asked me about them on TikTok. They saw them on my shelves and asked me to do a review, and I have done reviews of this series before. I even have a podcast episode dedicated to this first book, but I really want to do like a deep dive into this series because I think it merits it. I think it has a lot to say thematically, and so I was like, that's something I'm interested in. And also I haven't really I haven't finished the series. I read and reread the first 2 books, but this is one of the most stressful series that I've ever read. And I mean that like not in a bad way. It just has incredibly high stakes and a lot of bad things happen to our main characters, right? They're on a losing journey. It feels a lot to me like the Hunger Games in that aspect. I'm not comparing any other elements of these 2 books. That's like the sort of feeling to me of like bad things happening to our main character a lot. Like that's what we're experiencing here. So I get very stressed out. I'm super invested in our 2 main characters. So the idea of like the 3rd book has always super stressed me out, but I want to do it. I think I'm going to make that a project for this year is to finish out that series and then do some sort of review on it. I guess I should tell you, this is a young adult sci-fi novel. It is set on another planet where humans went to settle and colonize, and when they got there, what they found was that there is something about the planet that means that men, only men, their thoughts are, you can hear them, like other people can hear men's thoughts, and so they call it the noise. Our main character Todd lives in a town, a community called Prentice Town, and not only do they have noise, but there are only men in this town. The same germ that causes the noise also killed off all of the women in this settlement. Todd is the youngest man in this settlement. They become men when they turn 13, and right before his 13th birthday, his fathers pull him aside and tell him that everything that he basically knows about Prentice Town and about this world is wrong, and unfortunately there's not much else that they can tell him because he has to run. He has to go and escape immediately. And then we watch Todd on the run trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and also, surprise, surprise, he meets a girl. I absolutely understand why people don't enjoy this one as much as me, because Todd is an unlikable character. This is a whole exploration of toxic masculinity and indoctrination. And so even when Todd gets better, we're seeing him grow. It takes a lot for him to sort of unlearn the indoctrination that he's been taught his entire life. He has a really hard time letting go of the things that he thinks are real, of letting go of his entire worldview. It is certainly not a thing that he's just like, oh, okay, I was wrong in one book. He really struggles with this, even when he sees evidence of other things in front of his face. And so that is difficult to see him go through. You really want to shake him. And there are ways that that comes across, including this character is mean to his dog at the beginning of the story. It's part of the way that we see his frustration. It's part of the way that we see his inability to connect with people, and the way that toxic masculinity has affected him, as well as the noise. So, violence against animals and an unlikable character. This also has a very cyclical kind of plot, because Todd is running away, and people keep catching up to him. And so that cyclical plot can also wear on people. I will say the one complaint that I had originally that I will retract. All of that stands. The one thing that it just hits different. It's not that the complaint is not true. It's just that it hits different. Is that this has multiple villains, I would say, two main villains. And one of them is a religious man. And the reason that he is coming after Todd is because of his religious beliefs. And on first read, many, many years ago, I thought that villain was a little one-dimensional. He seemed too cartoonish and too mustache twirling for me. And I absolutely see why that is so, especially because this man just keeps coming and coming and coming throughout the story in a way that is oh my god, cartoonish, will this man ever be defeated, sort of thing. But reading it for the podcast, when we did that a couple of years ago and then again today, I'm like, no. Recent times have shown me that sometimes people are just this evil. And the thing is that it's not that he doesn't have his reasons or he doesn't have his motivations. This religious man absolutely does. And the fact that it is religious fervor that is spurring him on makes so much incredible sense to me in the year of our Lord 2023, that entire thing plays so differently. I gave this 3.5 stars when I originally read it. This is probably closer to a 4 for me now. If I could probably push it to 4.5 in my feelings, but I will admit that some of those circular plot things and some of the difficulty of just spending so much time with an unlikable character do sort of wear on the story. But this is just so beautiful in its themes, in its narrative voice. I love the way that this uses Todd's sort of dialect. I love the whole feature of the noise. There's so much in here that just speaks to me I've recommended this to friends multiple times, and every time nobody likes it as much as I do. So it's fine. This book is for me and me alone. I guess from there we'll talk about two more books that I can't talk about because they are Harper Collins titles, and Harper Collins continues to be the worst. So first is Pride and Premeditation by Tirzah Price. I bought this sometime within the last 1 or 2 years just from a display in Barnes & Noble, and I am low-key trying to be better about reading some of the books on my TBR, and I wish I could tell you what I thought about it, but I can't. And the other is Burn for Me by Ilona Andrews. I think that this is my Ilona Andrews year. After I finished reading Kate Daniels, I'm like, okay, I can move on to their other series, and I started with the Hidden Legacy series, and I wish I could tell you what I felt about this book, but I can't. Next up, I have The House in the Pines by Reyes. This was sent to me by the publisher. I worked with them over on TikTok to promote this, and then I ended up reading it, so this is my unpaid review. This is an adult mystery thriller about a woman whose high school best friend dies under mysterious circumstances connected to a man that she was briefly interested in, almost quasi-dating. And then many years later, she comes across a video, like a YouTube video, of somebody dying in the exact same circumstances, and it is the same man who is with that woman. And it brings back up for the main character all of the suspicions that she had about her best friend's death and how she was sure that this man was connected to it. And then she also has to contend with the way that she has been self-medicating and dealing with the trauma of that death, also of like nobody believing her about the circumstances of that death. I thought that this was very solid. I think that it is like a solid 3.5 mystery thriller. I'm very curious to see more from this author. That's always how I feel about debuts, where I'm like, oh, if this is like where you're starting, I'm super like curious to see you build and grow. So the thing to be aware of here, I think, is that this is a mystery thriller, but it wasn't like super thrilling. I think that this is incredibly slow paced. The mystery of it is very simple. It doesn't have a lot of running threads. It's not like we're investigating many avenues. We're just following this like single thread of past and present for this main character, and just her getting closer and closer to the truth for herself. And so that simplicity and that like flashing back and forth really slows down the pace of this entire thing. I think in one aspect it does fit sort of the eerie mood of it all, but it is something to be aware of, especially if you need your mysteries and thrillers to be faster pace. The thing that this did best of all was the thematic content. You know me, in a theme, and like the symbolism of it all. So this man has a house in the woods that he is supposedly building, and it becomes a feature of the mystery of it all. And so there's so much here about the feeling of like going back home, or what home is, and if home is a place, but also of like growing up, and can you ever sort of recover what you lost in your youth. And so all of that exploration I thought was really well done. And our main character is battling an addiction in this, and the author talks pretty candidly in interviews that I've read of that portion of it being built off of like things that she has experienced. So seeing that explored and represented, I really appreciate it as well. I think that this falls in line with like something that happens to me with mysteries and thrillers and horrors too. So off the top of my head, like Mexican Gothic and Jackal are two examples where the first half of the book I love, when we're sitting in the mystery and the eeriness and the atmosphere of like not knowing what the heck is going on. So we can sort of infuse all of this meaning into the open nature of that. But then in the second half of the book, when we start to get answers and it starts to get solidified into like, no, this is what is happening and it has an explanation. Sometimes I struggle with that, especially when I feel like the explanation doesn't fit, or the execution of it is like not as good as the execution of the mystery. And I think here, like the explanation, I think it did fit. I think that it was fine, but it just wasn't as fun or good when we're like, oh, this is what is happening. And I was like, oh. I would still highly recommend this, especially for people who are constantly looking for mysteries and thrillers written by people of color. There is a really neat aspect in here of connection to the main character's Guatemalan heritage. So super solid. I read it very quickly, even though it was slow paced. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, we have the House Salt Book Club book for January, which is Nevermoor, The Trials of Morrigan Crow, and this is by Jessica Townsend. The live show for this book is already up. We did that this past weekend, and I was so charmed by this middle grade book. It is about a girl who thinks that she is cursed. She makes bad things happen around her, and she knows that she's going to die very young, and so she basically comes up to her death date. She is expecting to die, and she gets whisked away by a man who brings her to like another place where people have abilities and magic, and she starts to compete for admission into a magical school. You guys know how much I love a good middle grade, and I think that this had so many elements of middle grade that I enjoy. It was smart and age appropriate, but it doesn't ever talk down to the audience. It was funny and charming. I loved the main character. She was so snarky and so sweet and very easy to root for, and I absolutely loved everything that this said about friendship. I started a newsletter in 2023. If you guys want to sign up for it, I will leave the link in the description. And basically what I'm going to do there is like talk about media, but not necessarily reviews, like take inspiration from things I'm reading and watching, and like talk to you guys about like things I relate it to, or like connections between pieces of media. So my first newsletter in January came from this. There was like some quotes in here about friendship that made me reflect on my best friendship with my best friend Nicole, and so I wrote all about our friendship. That tells you how much I just enjoyed that portion of the book. There were two things that really bothered me in here. One is that it follows this trope of like someone forcing a nickname on somebody who doesn't want it. Her name is Morrigan, and the main adult character in here wants to keep calling her Mog, and it's supposed to be this like thing of like him trying to like envelop her in the family, right, and trying to create this connection between them. But I hate this. I hate it so much. As someone named Ness, you can expect how passionately I feel in real life and in fiction about nicknames, especially unwanted nicknames, and forcing that on somebody. And this is repeated over and over and over again in this book. So that was an irritant to me. And then the other thing is that there is some withholding of information in this, and it is explained by the book why it had to be this way. And it is also explained by the category and the idea of like adults withholding information by children. But it got to certain points where it felt a little hand wavy to me, where it felt like we were just like, pay no attention to that and moving on with the plot. And that's kind of the point where I really start to again be rubbed the wrong way by the withholding of information. I feel like there were ways that the characters could have acted that would have still withheld information but been nicer or more understandable or more sensical or whatnot, like within the context of this story, and that just didn't happen. So overall, while I did really enjoy this, I read it super quickly, and I will continue on with the series. This is like a 4-star read for me as well. Finally, I read Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk, which is a novella. I actually had this as an audiobook through Libro FM's ALC program. I got it sometime last year, and I bought a physical copy because I really enjoyed this. This is a sapphic period piece about a magical detective who sold her soul to save her brother's life, but then has an opportunity to get out of that like contract, gain her soul back if she helps the person who holds her contract solve a mystery of like somebody who's been killing people in the city of Chicago. I thought that this was pretty well developed. If anything, it felt a little bit overstuffed to me plot-wise. Like it felt like maybe it had one or two too many things for the amount of time that we got to spend, but the character work was really wonderful. I was super invested in the main character and her significant other. I was rooting for them. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end, and it really is a bittersweet ending, but it was also like super touching. I highly recommend this in the capacity that I used it, where I was like unsure what I wanted to read next, and I just kind of wanted to get through something quickly, and this delivered. I also recommend this for fans of P. Jelly Clark's A Master of Djinn, especially like the novellas that are in that series. This had a similar vibe of being atmospheric and sapphic and mystery driven, and it certainly made me super curious about more of Polk's work. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, I'd love to chat with you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. I don't care how long it takes. Hmm.